My name is Natalie Mercer. I'm 33 years old, and I learned something brutal the night of my sister's wedding. A room full of well-dressed strangers can sound a lot like family when they decide you are the easiest person to laugh at. I was standing under soft gold lights with a champagne glass in my hand, trying to survive the reception without making a scene, when my mother turned toward me with that polished smile she only used when she wanted to hurt me in public and still look elegant doing it. She looked me up and down, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, then said she was just grateful at least one of her daughters had turned into someone people could actually be proud of. A few people laughed. A few more pretended not to. But in a room that big, humiliation spreads fast. Within seconds, it felt like every face in that ballroom had tilted in my direction, curious, amused, waiting to see whether I would break. My mother kept going, picking apart my career, my clothes, my life, like she had been saving this performance for years. And maybe she had. The truth is, she thought she was finally finishing a job she had started a long time ago. She thought if she embarrassed me badly enough in front of 300 guests, I would shrink back into the version of me she always preferred, scared, silent, and easy to dismiss. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't even raise my voice. I just smiled, set my glass down, and said 5 words to a staff member passing by. Then I walked toward the exit while the music kept playing. The laughter slowly died, and 5 minutes later the entire room learned something my mother should never have forgotten about me. Before I tell you exactly what she said next, and why that ballroom went dead quiet after I walked out, tell me what time it is, where you are right now, and where you're watching from, because I really want to know how far this story is about to travel. If you had met my mother in public, you probably would have liked her. Vivian Mercer had perfect posture, a soft, polished voice, and the kind of expensive taste that made people assume she was gracious just because she looked composed. She knew how to host a charity luncheon, write a thank you note, and make a cruel sentence sound like concern. My whole life, she cared more about appearances than honesty. And that was exactly why my younger sister Chloe became her favorite. Chloe was beautiful in a way people noticed immediately, sweet when she wanted to be, and much better than I ever was at giving our mother the kind of admiration she fed on. I was the harder child. I asked questions. I pushed back. I never learned how to make myself smaller just to keep the peace. By the time I was 16, my mother had already decided that Chloe was the daughter who reflected well on her, and I was the daughter who would always need to be corrected. She mocked the way I dressed, the jobs I took, the fact that I wanted to build something of my own instead of chasing a safe office title she could brag about over lunch. When I was in college, I started with a dessert cart at a weekend market in Santa Monica because I needed money, and because I loved the rhythm of events, the pressure, the details, the way one perfect night could feel effortless only if somebody invisible worked very hard behind the curtain. I turned that card into private dinner bookings, then brand launches, then wedding service, then a full hospitality company. I slept in my car twice during those early years. I burned my hands more times than I can count. I taught myself contracts at 2 in the morning and payroll on almost no sleep. My mother called it cute, then messy, then embarrassing. When Chloe got into a prestigious university, my mother paid for everything and threw her a party like she had personally invented success. When I signed the lease for my first commercial kitchen, my mother told me she hoped I enjoyed pretending to be important. The final break came 6 years ago at a family dinner when she announced, in front of relatives, that Chloe was the only daughter she could trust with anything meaningful because she knew how to live like a lady. I remember sitting there, still, cold, listening to cousins stare at their plates while my mother smiled as if she were explaining the weather. I left that night and stopped calling. She did not apologize. She simply told people I was dramatic. That was how our family worked. The person who caused the wound kept the reputation. The person who bled became the problem. So when Chloe's wedding invitation arrived at my condo in Newport Beach last month, thick cream paper, elegant script, hand-delivered by courier, I honestly thought it had to be some kind of mistake. There was a short handwritten note inside. Natalie, I know things have been broken for a long time. I don't want to start my marriage with this distance between us. Please come. I miss you. Love, Chloe. I read it 3 times. Then I laughed once because the timing was almost funny. After 6 years of silence, I was suddenly invited back for a major family event in front of 300 people. It felt less like love and more like a test. Still, part of me wanted to believe my sister meant it. Part of me wanted to believe people could grow up. I almost declined. Then I thought maybe showing up would be my way of proving that I had moved on even if they never had. The wedding was at a cliffside resort in Laguna Beach, the kind of place where every view looks staged and every floral arrangement seems to have its own security detail. By then, my company had grown far beyond those first dessert cart days. I was the founder and CEO of Mercer House Hospitality Group, which handled luxury event production, specialty dining logistics, and vendor partnerships all over Southern California. 3 months earlier, we had acquired a boutique catering company called White Harbor Events as part of a larger expansion. I approved the purchase, met their leadership, reviewed the numbers, and moved on. I did not personally manage every event under the group umbrella anymore. That mattered later. At the time, it was just another business deal in a very busy quarter. Before the wedding, I considered sending a gift and staying home, but something in Chloe's note stayed with me. Maybe it was the word miss. Maybe it was my own weakness. Maybe after enough years, even smart women still carry a tiny, ridiculous hope that family will finally become what it should have been all along. So I went. I wore a dark green silk dress, understated, tailored, expensive enough that nobody could dismiss me as the struggling daughter anymore. I arrived alone. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Ocean behind them, string quartet, white roses, candlelight waiting for sunset. From a distance, it almost looked like the kind of family memory people frame forever. Chloe hugged me when I arrived, and for a second she felt like my little sister again. She looked nervous, happy, overwhelmed. She told me I looked beautiful. Then she got pulled away by makeup, photographers, planners, one interruption after another. My father, Daniel, gave me an awkward side hug and asked how business was going in the same tone people use when they ask whether an old dog is still alive. My mother kissed the air beside my cheek and said she was glad I had chosen something tasteful to wear. Not kind, not warm, just relieved I wouldn't embarrass her visually. That should have told me everything I needed to know. At cocktail hour, I noticed my place card was at table 19, nowhere near the family tables, nowhere near Chloe, nowhere near the wedding party. I was seated with distant family friends and 2 people from Grant's side who didn't know who I was. When one of them asked how I knew the bride, I said I was her sister, and the woman blinked like she thought she must have heard me wrong. I smiled and let it go. The slights were small enough to deny and clear enough to feel deliberate. That was always my mother's talent. She preferred precision over drama until drama served her better. I also noticed something else that should have mattered sooner. The staff moved with a system I recognized. Their timing, their tray rotation, the way the floor manager touched her earpiece before adjusting table release for the first plated course. It felt familiar, but I was too busy trying not to be the visibly uncomfortable guest to examine that instinct. Then the speeches began. Chloe cried when her new husband spoke. Guests clapped. The music swelled, everyone relaxed. And I made the mistake of thinking maybe I had survived the night. Maybe the insult would only be private, subtle, survivable. I should have known my mother preferred a larger audience when she wanted to make a point. It started when someone at a nearby table asked whether I was married. I said no. Then someone else asked whether I still worked in events. Before I could answer properly, my mother turned from the family table, smiled across the room, and said, "Natalie doesn't work in events the way professionals do. She sort of bounces around rich people's parties and calls it a career." A few people laughed because they assumed it was family teasing. I felt heat rise up my neck, but I kept my face neutral. Then my mother stood, glass in hand, and the room quieted in that polite reception way where people assume they are about to hear something charming. What I heard instead was the beginning of a performance she had probably been rehearsing for years. She did not raise her voice at first. That would have been too obvious. She smiled, looked toward Chloe with tears shining in her eyes, and said how proud she was that one of her daughters had built a life with grace, stability, and real respect. Then she turned her body just enough for everyone to follow her gaze to me. She said some people spend years chasing attention and still never become the kind of woman others can rely on. Some people confuse being loud and independent with being accomplished. A few guests shifted in their seats. A few laughed again because the cruelty was still dressed up as wit. I sat perfectly still. My mother kept going. She said she was especially grateful the wedding had been left in capable hands, because if certain people had been allowed near the planning, we probably would all be eating tacos out of a parking lot. That got a bigger laugh. Not from everybody, but enough. Enough for the sound to hit me like something physical. Enough for me to look up and see faces turning, eyes sliding toward me, curiosity sharpening into recognition. I knew then that this was not a careless moment. She wanted the room to know exactly who the lesser daughter was. She wanted Chloe elevated beside me. She wanted my life reduced to a punchline before dessert. And the most humiliating part was that for a few seconds, maybe longer, I felt exactly what she wanted me to feel. Small. 17 again. Trapped at a table while the adults smiled at my discomfort and called it honesty. Then my mother delivered the line she had been saving. She lifted her glass and said, "At least one of my girls turned into someone people can be proud of." Chloe's face changed immediately. She whispered, "Mom." My father looked down. Not angry. Not shocked. Just unwilling. That was worse. Some guests froze. Others gave those thin, uncertain smiles people wear when they realize too late they have laughed at something ugly. I stood up slowly, set my napkin beside my plate, and met my mother's eyes. She was waiting for a scene. She wanted tears, maybe anger, maybe one sharp public reaction she could later use as proof that I was unstable, selfish, impossible. Instead, I smiled. Not warmly, not theatrically. Just enough to let her know something had shifted and she was the only one in the room who did not understand it yet. I said, "Congratulations on the perfect evening." Then I turned and walked away from table 19, while the silence behind me thickened. As I crossed the edge of the ballroom, I passed a service station hidden behind a floral wall. One of the staff members glanced up and I recognized her. Not vaguely, not maybe. I knew her. She had worked 2 high-profile charity galas for one of our affiliate teams under White Harbor before the acquisition. I stopped. She looked startled, then respectful in the way employees do when they recognize senior leadership in an unexpected place. That was the exact second the room inside me changed. I looked past her and saw the logo stamped small on the side of an insulated transport case, White Harbor Events, a company fully owned by Mercer House Hospitality Group, my company. My mother had just humiliated me in front of 300 guests at a reception being catered by a business she did not realize belonged to me. For 1 second, I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the irony was so perfect it felt written. I stepped aside, took out my phone, and called Elise Carter, my chief operating officer. She answered on the second ring. I asked one question. Is the White Harbor team at the Holloway Mercer wedding under our current operating authority or still under legacy management? Elise did not hesitate. Ours? Why? I looked through the ballroom doors at my mother, still standing with her glass, still wearing the satisfied expression of a woman who thought she had won something important. Then I said, because ownership was just publicly insulted by the mother of the bride in front of witnesses. Pause all service. Have the floor manager document it, then pull the team. Elise was silent for less than a second. She knew me well enough to understand I would never issue that order lightly. Are you sure? I said, completely. Then I handed the phone to the floor manager and gave her 5 words. Cancel everything and pull the team. She took the phone, listened to Elise confirm it, and the color drained from her face. Within seconds, radios clicked alive. Doors opened. Staff changed direction, and while the band kept playing and the guests kept talking, the machinery holding that beautiful night together quietly began to shut down. There is a strange kind of power in doing something irreversible without raising your voice. I did not storm back into the ballroom. I did not grab a microphone. I did not announce who I was. I simply stood near the side exit and watched a chain of professional decisions move faster than gossip. Servers stopped lining up the main course. The pastry team covered the dessert display instead of plating it. 2 staff members began rolling transport racks away from the service corridor. The bar remained open because it was venue-run, but the heart of the reception started collapsing in real time, and at first almost nobody noticed. The music shifted. Guests returned to their conversations. My mother sat down, pleased with herself. Chloe was trying to smile through whatever new anxiety had landed behind her eyes. Then the pause grew too long. One table checked their watches. Another looked around for servers. Then someone from the planner's team hurried toward the kitchen. 2 minutes later, the planner herself appeared, whispering urgently to the venue manager. Both women looked toward the service hall, then toward me, then toward my mother. I could see the moment confusion turned into alarm. By then, several guests had noticed trays disappearing instead of arriving. The room got louder in the wrong way, not celebratory, questioning, uneasy. A groomsman crossed the floor to ask what was happening. Someone joked that maybe the kitchen had caught fire. Nobody laughed. Then the venue manager approached my mother. She bent down, said something low, and my mother's expression changed so fast it was almost violent. The smile vanished. The blood drained from her face. She looked at me across the room as if she had just remembered something she should have known all along. The manager spoke again. My mother stood up so fast her chair nearly tipped backward. Chloe turned to her, confused. My father rose next, finally alert. I could not hear every word from where I stood, but I heard enough. Ownership, hostile conduct, termination clause, my company. My mother stared at me with naked disbelief, then fury, then something very close to fear. She started walking toward me, but the planner intercepted her first, panicked, speaking too quickly. Guests were openly watching now. 300 people had not all laughed at me before, but 300 people were absolutely paying attention now. That was better. Much better. Chloe came hurrying behind my mother, wedding gown in one hand, horror all over her face. Natalie, what is going on? I looked at her, then at my mother. I kept my tone calm because calmness was suddenly the sharpest weapon in the room. I said, White Harbor is owned by Mercer House. Your mother publicly insulted ownership and created a hostile environment for staff. Per contract, service is terminated. My mother snapped, You cannot be serious. This is your sister's wedding. I said, Yes, it is. You probably should have remembered that before turning me into entertainment. Her mouth opened, but for once, nothing polished came out. Only raw anger. She hissed that I was vindictive, unstable, and pathetic. I almost thanked her for continuing the legal record in public. Instead, I said, "Any further communication can go through my attorney." I gave the venue manager my business card and asked her to send all incident documentation to corporate counsel before the end of the night. Behind us, staff members in black uniforms moved with elegant speed, carrying away the meals my mother had assumed she was entitled to. Guests began pulling out phones. Some were whispering. Some were staring at my mother in a way I had never seen before, not admiringly, not indulgently, assessing her, recalculating. One older woman near the dance floor looked directly at me and gave the smallest nod, like she finally understood the truth of the evening. Chloe looked like she might cry, but even then I could see a harder realization dawning beneath the panic. She had watched our mother wound me for years by inches. Tonight, she had watched the room see it too. My father finally approached, using that stern voice that had never once protected me, but always seemed available when he wanted control. He said I was ruining the wedding. I looked him in the eye and answered, "No, I am refusing to keep financing my own humiliation." That shut him up for exactly 1 second, which was longer than usual. Then I walked out. I heard the first real wave of chaos behind me as I reached the valet. Guests asking questions, planner trying to stall, mother demanding answers, bride crying, music stopping, a perfect night cracking open because the wrong person had been treated like she had no power. I got into my car, shut the door, and sat there with both hands on the steering wheel. I expected to feel guilty. I expected to shake. What I felt instead was something much quieter and much rarer. Relief, not joy, not revenge exactly. Relief. Because for the first time in my life, my mother had aimed humiliation at me and failed to control the ending. The next morning, my phone looked like a disaster zone. Missed calls from family members I had not heard from in years. Long texts from people demanding an explanation before they had even bothered to ask what had been said to me in the ballroom. My aunt called me heartless. A cousin said Chloe was inconsolable. One family friend sent a message that began with, "I understand both sides," which is almost always how people announce they understand only the convenient one. Then there was a voicemail from my mother accusing me of trying to destroy the family out of jealousy. I forwarded everything to legal and blocked her number. Elise had already moved faster than I expected. By 9 in the morning, my general counsel had incident reports from the floor manager, written statements from 4 staff members, and confirmation from the venue that security footage captured my mother's speech closely enough to establish the sequence and tone of events. White Harbor's contract included a clause allowing immediate termination if ownership or staff were subjected to abusive, discriminatory, or hostile treatment by a client or a client's immediate party. It had originally been written to protect employees from drunk donors and abusive celebrity guests. My mother had triggered it wearing custom silk and family pearls. By noon, her attorney had called ours demanding a full refund and threatening litigation for emotional distress, reputational harm, and event disruption. Reputational harm. That was the phrase that made me laugh out loud in my office. My mother had publicly mocked me in a ballroom full of people, and still believed reputation was something only other people could damage. We responded with a settlement offer. We would return 50% of the deposit after hard costs, staffing, and preparation expenses were deducted. In return, they would sign a non-disclosure agreement, a mutual non-disparagement provision, and a release of claims. No lawsuit, no public statement, no online attacks. My mother rejected it at first, of course. She always believed outrage could force reality to bend. She tried posting negative reviews through friends. Our legal team had them removed. She contacted one of our junior managers through LinkedIn. He sent the message to HR without replying. She even attempted to pressure Chloe into calling me and begging for a reversal, as if the problem were still dinner and not years of humiliation wrapped in pearls and etiquette. But something else was happening at the same time, and this was the part my mother could not control. Guests had seen enough. Not all of them knew the full family history, but they knew what public contempt looked like, especially when it came from a mother toward her daughter. Two women who attended the reception contacted my office to apologize for laughing before they understood what was happening. One of Grant's business associates requested a proposal for a winter fundraising gala, saying he admired how professionally my team handled an impossible situation. The venue manager privately told Elise that several guests had asked what exactly the mother of the bride had said to provoke such a drastic and contractually supported response. That word mattered too, supported, because once the story left the family and entered the wider world, it stopped sounding like petty sibling drama and started sounding like what it really was. A powerful woman used a public event to demean someone she assumed would take it, and then discovered that person had more authority than she imagined. 3 days after the wedding, Chloe called from an unknown number. I almost let it ring out, but something in me answered anyway. She was crying before she said hello. Not dramatic crying, not manipulative, exhausted crying. She told me she had not known White Harbor belonged to Mercer House. I said I believed her. She told me she had begged our mother not to make any remarks during the reception, but had not realized how far she planned to go. I said that was the problem with people who spend years excusing cruelty. They always think this time it will stay manageable. Chloe got quiet. Then she said the one thing I had waited years to hear from someone in that family. She said, I should have stopped her a long time ago. That did not fix anything. But it mattered. I asked where Grant was. She told me he was furious at our mother and embarrassed by the entire scene. Their honeymoon had been postponed because they had spent the first 48 hours of marriage dealing with the fallout and arguing about boundaries. For once, I did not rush to comfort anyone. I told Chloe I was sorry her wedding ended that way, and I meant it. But I was done carrying the emotional cost of our mother's choices so everyone else could keep pretending they were normal. 2 days later, my parents signed the settlement. No apology, no accountability, just signatures and silence. They took the partial refund. They accepted the terms. And in doing so, my mother admitted the only truth she has ever truly respected. Power matters when it is no longer hers. The legal part ended quickly, but the real consequences took longer to settle. And in some ways, they were far more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation could have been. My mother could not talk openly about what happened without risking the agreement she had signed, and that stripped her of the one thing she had always depended on most: control of the story. She could not glide through her social circle and turn me into the unstable daughter who overreacted, because too many people in that ballroom had seen her face before she knew I owned the company. Too many had seen the moment confidence turned to panic. Too many had heard just enough to start asking the right questions. Within a few weeks, invitations she normally expected stopped arriving as quickly. A charity committee quietly rotated leadership. A country club friend my mother had known for years suddenly became very busy. Nothing dramatic on the surface, just the elegant social version of a door closing. My father, who had spent most of my life mistaking passivity for peace, found himself sitting beside the consequences of his silence every morning. Chloe changed more than I expected. Not overnight, not perfectly, but genuinely. She wrote me a real letter a month later, not a text, not a rushed apology squeezed between excuses. A letter. She admitted she had spent years letting our mother define which of us was easy to love and which of us was exhausting. She admitted that being favored had never felt as safe as people imagine, because favoritism is just another form of control. The same woman who built her up could tear her apart the second she stopped performing correctly. Chloe and Grant moved out of the condo my parents had helped them secure and started over in a smaller place with fewer strings attached. She began therapy. She stopped calling our mother every day. She learned the word boundary and, more importantly, started living it. As for me, I did not ride off into some flawless new life where nothing hurt anymore. That is not how family damage works. What changed was simpler and more important. I stopped confusing forgiveness with access. I stopped treating my ability to endure disrespect as proof of maturity. I stopped believing that being the bigger person meant volunteering to be hurt again in prettier rooms. My company grew. The Winter Gala booked. Then another event. Then two more. Not because chaos is good for business, but because competence under pressure is memorable, and dignity has a way of attracting the right people. I promoted the floor manager who took my call that night because she handled an impossible situation with intelligence and grace. I gave the team a bonus because none of them deserved to be dragged into family dysfunction wearing pressed black uniforms and polite smiles. Every now and then, someone still asks whether I regret it, whether I wish I had just stayed quiet for Chloe's sake, taken the hit, smiled through dinner, let the insults pass like old weather. The answer is no. I regret that my sister's wedding became the stage for a truth our family had avoided for years, but I do not regret refusing to sponsor my own humiliation. There is a difference. And that difference matters, especially for anyone listening who was taught that love means endless tolerance. It does not. Love without respect becomes control. Family without accountability becomes damage. And silence, when it is demanded from the person being hurt, is not peace. It is permission. The lesson I carried out of that ballroom was not really about revenge, even though I understand why it looks that way from the outside. The deeper lesson was about self-respect. About the moment you realize that protecting your dignity is not cruelty, even when people who benefited from your silence call it selfish. About understanding that boundaries are not walls built to punish others. They are doors that teach people how to enter your life correctly or not at all. If this story has any value beyond the shock of what happened, I hope it is this. Never let anyone, not even family, convince you that your worth is something they get to announce to a room. Never confuse being tolerated with being loved. And never be so desperate to keep the peace that you hand someone the power to define who you are. My mother thought she was reminding everyone which daughter mattered more. Instead, she gave me the clearest proof of who I had become. Not the girl she could humiliate at dinner and dismiss by morning. A woman who built something real, protected the people who worked for her, and finally understood that sometimes the most meaningful thing you can do for yourself and for the people watching you is refuse to stay seated when disrespect is served like part of the meal.